People arrive home at night, their faces weary from the day. The warmth of the house welcomes them in from the darkness.
She lit the candle because it was easier than answering the question, "Where is he?" A single candle burns quietly, its flame steady and hopeful in the dim room. Night after night, the flame sat like a small promise, something steady in a world that kept changing. The candle sits on the windowsill, a small beacon shining out into the night, waiting for someone to return. Shops close for the evening, their windows glowing softly, each one a story behind the glass. At first, people barely noticed, a passing glance, a folded hand. But habits see the things we do not. It began without a word. There was no announcement, no grand declaration, no call to arms. There was only the quiet, stubborn persistence of a single light in a window, a small flame that returned every evening as the world outside grew dark. It asked for nothing. It simply burned, a silent vigil against the encroaching shadows. For the bus driver on his early morning route, it became a landmark, a tiny, flickering constant in the pre-dawn fog. He didn't know the story behind the glass, the reason for the vigil. He only knew that seeing it made the cold air feel a little less sharp, the empty streets a little less lonely. He started to look for it. One morning, the thought of the solitary light followed him long after his shift ended. He found himself standing before a bakery, the smell of fresh bread pulling him in. It wasn't a plan, just an impulse, a simple, warm thing, a way to send a message without words. "I see your light. You are not alone." He left the loaf on the doorstep, a humble offering, and retreated before he could be seen. Inside, the silence of the house had grown heavy. The sound from the porch was an intrusion, a crack in the stillness. Hesitantly, she opened the door to find the bread. She looked out onto the empty street, a question in her eyes. Who? Why? The gift was a mystery that held no threat, only a gentle curiosity. It was the first unexpected kindness she had known in a long time. And when someone saw the light, they did what small things could do. A jogger, who had seen the bus driver's quiet delivery, felt a similar pull. The next day, a folded blanket appeared. Then a dog walker, who had also been watching the house, left a small potted plant, a stubborn bit of green against the gray. A child from down the street slipped a crayon drawing of a brilliant yellow sun under the mat, each a quiet testament, a silent acknowledgement. These small gifts don't fix big losses. They can't. That is a weight too heavy for a loaf of bread or a woolen blanket to bear. They don't erase the pain or mend what has been irrevocably broken. Their purpose is quieter, more fundamental. They are simply a reminder that someone is still looking up from their own grief, from their own struggles, to hold out a hand. They are proof that even in the depths of sorrow, human connection persists, fragile but unyielding. The gifts were a quiet chorus, each one a note in a song of shared humanity, whispering, "We are here, we see you." And that, in itself, is a kind of light. Hope doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It returns quietly, on tired feet, carrying bread, or a blanket, or a simple hand-drawn sun. On the night the city went dark, the wind learned how to find every weak flame. The familiar hum of the city just stopped. In its place, a profound silence fell, so deep you could hear the city's old bones creak. The darkness was not empty. It was heavy, pressing against the glass of every window. Rain turned the streets into mirrors, and the world seemed very large, and very lonely. In a small house, a woman struck a match. It was an act of rebellion, a refusal to let the dark have the final say. She lit a single candle and placed it in the window, not as a signal, but as a statement. "I am still here." The flame was a fragile thing, a tiny golden heart beating in the gloom. It shivered with every gust that rattled the window frames. Her hands cupped the candle flame, protecting it, her breath held steady. In the flickering light, the familiar room became a landscape of shifting shadows, a place of mystery and quiet contemplation. The candle was her only companion, its silent, steady presence a comfort against the storm's relentless voice. It didn't promise to last forever, only to burn for now, and for now, that was enough. Across the street, an old man who had seen more blackouts than he could count peered through his blinds. He expected only darkness, but then he saw it. A single, unwavering point of light. The candle did not drive the storm away. It couldn't mend a power line or calm the wind. But it asked one simple thing of those who saw it. Stay close. It was an invitation whispered across the rain-slicked asphalt, speaking not of rescue, but of witness. It said, "You are not alone." That small truth, once seen, could not be unseen. It began to pull, a gentle force against the isolation of the storm. Slowly, doors began to open. A shopkeeper lit an old hurricane lamp. A teenager, untethered from glowing screens, found a strange freedom in the dark, her flashlight cutting a path through the rain. A young mother, hushing her frightened child, pointed to the light and promised a warm place. People came with lanterns, with hands open and pockets not empty of the small comforts that make shelter bearable. They brought what they had, a thermos of tea, a blanket, and most importantly, their presence. They walked as a small constellation, each carrying their own light towards a shared center. When the woman opened her door, the warm, honeyed air of her small home rushed out to greet them. There were no grand pronouncements, just a simple smile of welcome. They stepped across the threshold, shedding the storm. The sound of dripping rain from their jackets and the soft clink of lanterns being set down on a wooden table became the first notes of a new kind of music. The room, once a solitary space, began to fill not just with people, but with a collective warmth, a shared breath against the night. They gathered around her table, their faces painted in the soft, forgiving light of a dozen different flames. They did not come to solve her missing. Whatever private grief or loneliness had prompted her to light that first candle remained her own. They came because a little light had given them a place to gather their own pieces. In the quiet murmur of shared stories and the steam from shared cups, they found a different kind of power. Not the kind that ran the city, but the resilient power of connection. Strangers becoming neighbors, weaving a blanket of community against the cold. The dawn that followed the storm was unlike any other. It didn't arrive with a sudden burst of gold, but seeped into the world, a soft, pearlescent gray that promised peace. The air, washed clean, carried the scent of wet earth and ozone. For the first time in a long time, the only sounds were the drip of water from eaves and the tentative song of a single bird, reclaiming its territory. The city's constant hum had been silenced, and in its place was a profound shared quiet. It was a morning for breathing deep, for noticing the small, intricate details the world offers when we are forced to slow down. Slowly, doors opened, not with the usual rush of a weekday, but with a gentle hesitation. People emerged, blinking in the new light, their faces etched with the weariness of a long night, but their eyes holding a new kind of curiosity. The shopkeeper, whose storefront sign was now a jagged memory, was the first to break the silence, setting up a small gas stove on the pavement. The hiss of the flame and the eventual aroma of brewing coffee was a primal invitation, a gesture that said, "We are here, together." In a single night, the street became a little less anonymous. Names were learned, numbers exchanged, the small scaffolding of a neighborhood rebuilt. But it was more than just logistics. Stories were shared over steaming mugs, the small invisible walls that had defined their lives. The polite nod, the averted gaze, had crumbled with the storm. They were no longer just residents of the same street. They were survivors of the same night, keepers of the same quiet morning. This was community being rebuilt, not with wood and nails, but with shared vulnerability and tentative smiles. When the power returned, it happened without warning. A sudden jarring flicker, a hum that grew from a whisper to a roar. Refrigerators shuddered back to life. For a moment, there was a collective joyful cheer, normalcy. But then a different kind of silence fell. The magic of the quiet was gone. Yet the change was not dramatic, and it did not vanish. A board on the shop, a younger face ready to help. The world had not been remade, only shifted, just slightly toward one another. The habits of connection, born in darkness, persisted in the light. She never found the sun she waited for. The absence remained, a quiet, constant companion, as patient and real as the photograph on her windowsill. but the light had already done its work in ways she hadn't expected. Her vigil was no longer a solitary one. Her grief had not vanished, but it was now held, gently, by the community that had formed around her small, hopeful flame. The light hadn't brought him home, but it had brought the world to her door, reminding her that even in the deepest loss, you don't have to be alone. A single light asks little, a wick, a flame, a moment of attention. But in its quiet persistence, it asks the world to come closer. It is an invitation to see and be seen. Weeks later, her candle was no longer the only one. It was answered by other small, courageous glows down the street, a constellation of tiny beacons in the urban dark. It reminds us that hope is not a grand fire, but a small flame, passed from one hand to the next until the entire street is lit from within. If this little light moved you, subscribe for more quiet stories that remind us why kindness matters.